Good evening. I'm Rudy El-Khouri, Dean of the School of Architecture. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome. This is the first lecture in our Tecnoglass series. This series now is in its 10th year. This is the 10th year anniversary of the Tecnoglass series. This is an ambitious, curated series that benefits from the generosity of our sponsor, Tecnoglass, enabling us to sustain a very high level of engagement and participation in this series. It's curated, it has a theme every year, typically orchestrated by a faculty member who carefully puts this thing together with some ideas, and we try to stick with the theme unless I butt in and I say, oh, can we just introduce this one other lecture that does not quite fit this theme, but usually it works out. So I want to now introduce my colleague, Shauna Meyer, who was responsible for this fall's lecture, who's going to tell you a bit more about the topic and also introduce our speaker tonight. And again, I want to emphasize how grateful we are for the sponsorship of Tecnoglass.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Dean El-Khouri. Thank you. And I would like to also thank Tecnoglass, our generous sponsor in making these talks possible. As it is the first lecture of this year, the fall series, I wanted to emphasize the theme elastic. Elastic, we titled it Between Architecture and Urbanism. The lecture series posits a group of practices leveraging the potential of design to define environments stretching across scale, fabric, social contexts, territories, sensibilities, and objects. Sharing a common thread, lecture guests hold a deeply rooted agenda linking people to place, building to place, material to place, and social values to place. The shared agenda will serve as a guide to establish questions and define values into each specific architectural investigation, defining new narratives for each design intervention that shape inclusive, equitable, resilient, and most of all, spaces of excitement. These uncommon approaches to practice challenge the profession's contemporary thinking on the role of architecture, stretching design thinking across the limits of building. In these innovative practices, there is a contemplative yet vigilant approach in the relationship of architecture and urbanism. An elasticity of design emerges. Before I introduce Javier, I would like to remind everyone that these lectures offer HSW credit. To receive the credit, please put your name and AIA number or license number and email in the chat. Or you can email me the same info at smeyer@miami.edu, which I will put that information in the chat. I submit this by Friday, so don't email me in months asking for credit for this lecture tonight. On to the main event. Commencing our fall 2025 Elastic Lecture Series is Javier Sanchez. He is an honorary FAIA and founding principal of JSA. Javier's practice, JSA, is founded in Mexico City and engages in the renewal of Mexico City, challenging themselves to design contemporary interventions that celebrate the city's heritage, restore urban fabric, and transcend time. Today, I had the opportunity to become a little bit more personally acquainted with Javier and the sensitivity and attentiveness he provides during our conversations and reflections is clearly present in the examples of his practice over the last 3 decades. Tonight, Javier will give a presentation titled Microurbanisms, which you can see on the screen now, that explores the studio's vision or urban design or urban acupuncture, as I'm very excited to hear about, as a way to rehabilitate urban ecosystems. Thank you guys again for being here, and please help me welcome Javier Sanchez.
Thank you for inviting me to this important event. I appreciate always having a conversation, meeting new friends, visiting other places, I think that's part of the joy of being an architect, and I'm thankful for that. I was today in the studio with, we were talking with Chris and Jonathan, and we were talking about a little bit what I'm going to show you today. And it's funny because everything is connected, no? And I think things happen for a reason. It's really interesting how life plays back. So when Shona called me up to invite me to this lecture, I was intrigued and interested in the theme, in the topic of the lectures that will happen, because I've always believed in that elasticity, and I've always thought that if one thing we should do differently as architects is to integrate cross-disciplinary collaborations, to try to go outside of our box, the box that we build as architects, and to try to think more broadly, at the same time, try to think more integratively. So that's what I've been working on. I have a practice that, as Shona was saying, is almost 30 years old. So I have a couple of partners that have been working with me for 20 years now, Aisha and Benedict. They are part of our studio. Currently, Aisha and me were teaching at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and we're doing a relay kind of studio where I go and come back and she arrives, and then the other way around, and it's fun. And we're working at the same time, so working and teaching is something we like to do. Benedict is German, but he's been living in Mexico for more than 20 years now. This is a photograph of our team that we took last year in December. We visited this home that we built in the mountains close to Mexico City, and we did a weekend party to celebrate the end of the year. And we took this photograph. Our practice goes in between these ideas, the idea being that all of our projects in a way are interconnected. They are not only about hospitality and cuisine, but they can be at the same time about culture and heritage, or the same could happen between community workspaces and residential and housing, and they all cross through sustainable development. So it's tough to put a project in a category. We don't like to do that. That's why also the elastic idea I think is great. So the idea of this first part is how through housing and through private projects, we can establish a dialogue with the city and improve the overall urban fabric. You know, Mexico City is very different, obviously, from Miami, but there are some similarities that I was actually seeing in the studio today in the afternoon. And we're going through a process of redevelopment, of redensification, and we're working with things that are already there, and that is our laboratory, you know? So within that, Mexico City has this heritage that has, in a way, constrained development, and I would say, at the same time, created an opportunity and a potential. These different colors show different parts of the city that are preserved, protected, landmark, and there are other areas where there is no protection as well, no? Mexico City uses the part above, and the whole thing is surrounded by the state of Mexico. So in the end, Mexico City live maybe 8.5 to 10 million people, and the other half is around the city. So it's like a 20 million metropole. Within that, in the downtown of Mexico City, in the central neighborhoods that were built 1900 to today, with some areas that were built before, obviously, like the Centro Histórico is at least 600 years, but more. We have been building projects. Most of them, as you can see, are housing projects, but there are other types of projects that fit into those categories that I was talking about. And in the end, every dot is like a project that we've been doing in the last 30 years, and they kind of have the same philosophy. And that's how we connect projects. Maybe they are totally different. We are totally different. I'm not the same as 30 years ago, but we still think in some ways we will not change our way of thinking, no? One of the things that we like to do is to redensify. This is a project that we finished a year ago in the center of Colonia Condesa. Condesa is an amazing neighborhood from the 1930s, developed by a group of developers that created it around several parks. So it's an urban fabric that has diagonals, that has tree-lined boulevards, that has parks, small urban parks that are what makes it really rich. And it has landmark homes that have been built in the 1930s that today are protected. So in 1996, I was able to do a first project on this area. That's where I actually that's when the office began 28 years ago. And I've been working on the same block, this block. Today we finished this last project a year ago, but if not, I would have been working for 27 years on that block, which is incredible, no? I think it's a real treat for me. This project that I'm going to show you here is set in a kind of like a little bit over an acre. There are some houses, as you can see, that are hidden behind trees, but they are the old California style, Neo-California style. It's like a Neo-Spanish kind of style that was the style in vogue at that time. The trees have obviously made some of the homes impossible to look at because they take the first row, and I'm very happy about that. So actually, we were not only dealing with integrating these old homes, but also integrating the trees. So you can see how this red house has a porch, and it's kind of hidden. It doesn't really feel Mexico City, right? But it is. And gardens are all around. This is the other house that was kept and integrated into the project. So 1996 to 2000, kind of, we were working on this project that has a small inner court that to 2002. So it was, 6 years of work. I call it microurbanism because from private projects that are independent of each other, we're building certain urban rules or certain design rules that are kept, and one project is linked to the next and to the next. Through what? Through open space, through community space. The space that is not built. That space that is not built, if we can, we like to share it between different properties. And that way we create these inner courts, like in the middle of the block, that is a very beautiful way of building city fabric. It happens everywhere in many places of the world, where the block has like an inner court, an inner park, an inner garden, no? And the city, after when it was really developed in Mexico City, there were no inner courts or inner patios like I'm talking about. I'm talking more maybe London. You see those. You see them in Lima, in Peru, as well, in parts that are inspired in that kind of design. But we were thinking that it would be nice to integrate spaces, and this is a community space shared by that project. And you will see the space we designed here, which is, if we have an acre, it's half an acre of a garden with trees that were already there, no? So the different, I don't know, zoning we originally had these homes here. There was some buildings like in the back. There was a vecindad, which is a housing type here, and the rest were the gardens and the two homes. We created an urban plan of buildings that would face the south. The south is to the south of the drawing, north to the top of the drawing. So they would be isolated between each other, and they would have east-west, north-south, and they would all be looking and sharing the garden. So that's kind of like this idea of how do you build in the middle of the block that we were talking about today in your guys' studio. It's the same idea, but how do we do that? And at the same time, we recycle protected homes, and we keep the trees. So we're adding, in this project, we added 100 new homes when originally there were 4. So it's 25 more times more dense, no? And you can see in the section, this is the first part of the project that I finished in 2002. That's the courtyard that is shared. There's a parking underneath. And this is the 2023 project with the street included. The area where the trees and the homes are has no parking underneath, obviously. And then we have 2 decks of parking below where we built in the middle of the block so that we could keep the trees and the homes intact. And I really like that it is not easy to make a photograph. So whoever is kind of like overexcited about designing facades, many architects are, we aren't so much. It doesn't really matter. I think housing is from the inside out. Buildings need to last, they need to age. But other than that, they should have nice and beautiful light and terraces and other kinds of things. And not be overwhelmed by a design facade, I think. Here, the facade is the trees. The homes and the new buildings become some form of a collage between 1928 and 2022, like almost 100 years pass between this and this, which I think is nice. And the trees are the ones that negotiate the space in between. You can see the trees are as tall as the buildings that we added, or even taller, which is, I mean, how do you do that? How do you get away with bringing a, I don't know, an 8-story tall tree? You can't, right? So it's best to keep them. And then on the urban plan, the buildings kind of are floating a little bit, half of them at least, over the urban or this shared urban realm, where the ground floor footprint is a little bit softer. So that means you can go under the buildings, you kind of feel this kind of Brazilian architecture kind of idea of a connection on the ground plane, and then the buildings happen above. I always say that the most important plan of any building is the ground floor plan, and we try to celebrate the ground floor, which is where we meet, where we have a democratic space. And then the units are, as I was saying, they look out to the trees. They are generous, some of them, some are smaller. They have balconies that look out, on this case, to the trees and to the city and to the other buildings of the project. They have roof gardens, sometimes the stairs, which is something we like to play a lot with, like trying to calibrate the section. You know, a section could be just as simple as one stacked floor on top of the other, or it could be like one half of a height floor and going half a level down and maybe going half a level up, and playing with the section to qualify the section, because maybe for sleeping, you don't need to qualify the section a lot. 8 feet is fine. But maybe for a social space, 12 feet, 14 feet is nicer, no? So can we get away with doing homes that have like a quality in the social part that is different from the sleeping part? For example, that was a question here. The relationship in between buildings is negotiated, as I was saying, by the existing trees. You see double stairs for code. They have 2 entry points and they overlap, but they are separate. You can see also our small Manhattan. That's the tall part of Mexico City where skyscrapers 60 stories high are happening. This is a very different scale. This is in the Cuauhtemoc neighborhood. It's a small hotel we did some years ago. It's called Carlota. Carlota was the Empress of Mexico. At some point, we had a Austro-Hungarian emperor and empress, part of our history. She had Reforma built, modeled on Champs-Élysées in Paris. And within that, there are the towers happening here. All of those are the skyscrapers. Like this is a Cesar Pelli building, and you know, like these huge glass buildings. the huge roundabouts. This is the Angel of Independence, one of our monuments to the independence of Mexico. And on the inner blocks, this is like a modern inner block, buildings between 6, 7, 8 stories. So a hotel was built there in the 1940s. That's a photograph from internet that we found. Only with the name of the hotel, we found these two amazing photographs. But that was not there when we arrived at this building. This was there in its place. So someone decided to renovate the building by adding a cover, some form of wrapper around the facade, and keeping the facade, this facade that you see here, keeping it behind the glass. So it had decayed. We seized the opportunity of the next door lot, created a small appendix to enter the building, to kind of create an elevator going up and down for the hotel, which is kind of like a city motel, because it has corridors and the windows face the corridors, but to have an elevator. And we focused all of our energy on the courtyard. We kind of let the facade stay. The 1980s facade we kind of adopted. We made some moves, like making the pool smaller, creating more terrace space, making the pool part of the experience of the city. You can see the pool from the city, which if you're walking on the sidewalk here, you have that, well, not here in the old, but now you have that invitation to go in, as you will see. And more, like to create an opportunity of an urban oasis. So we kind of said, let the facade stay as it is. Let not waste energy or money on that, and let's focus on the courtyard. So basically, we think that, or we thought that the courtyard could really transform the space and make it like an oasis behind those very tall buildings in Mexico City. We added a new floor that you can see here, and a terrace. And I mean, we did some operations, but we kept we limited our battles, let's say. So from the city, I think it's nice that you're walking on the sidewalk and you see the pool, you see people working on the kitchen, you see a design store. So originally you saw nothing, and now at least the ground floor is soft. Again, this idea of a soft ground floor. And then you enter and you discover things. This is a rebar pergola. We were keeping a lot of the materials that at some point, there was so many renovations of this building, we were peeling things to find out what we could keep, what we would change, where we would operate. We added this screen that unifies the space, gives privacy to the corridors, and connects the building back to 1950. So you can see the difference, no? It's the same photograph. I think hotels have this moment where the city and the tourism or the tourists meet. And I love that intersection. So it's nice that you have people sleeping in this building and it's kind of shared with the city, but at the same time that people go to the room, they have some privacy. So this screen is kind of like creating that veil or that filter, no? You kind of feel you're entering something more private when you go to your bedroom, and I think that's nice, no? This is, again, original 2013 when we began this project. And as you can see, well, you can imagine this is the glass block, the glass facade that we kept. And so that is the mirror glass to the street. We invited some young artists and designers to work with us doing the interiors and the art of all of the rooms. This is another housing project, and it's again a recycling of an old chocolate factory in the Santa María la Ribera neighborhood, which is an amazing, I would say one of the most beautiful neighborhoods we still have that hasn't been changed maybe in the last, I don't know, 100 years. Changed very little. So we were invited by a developer to work on this 2.5-acre plot to add 250 units of housing. We were touching the city street on 3 points, and there was a landmark structure we had to keep in the middle of the plot. So, which is this original industrial building within the plot that really had, the value was more on this facade than on the interior structure. And the developer wanted density. There was no negotiation with that. So we kind of told them this was what we needed to keep. It was protected. We proposed to have like a 50-50 open and built space, and which is distributed here. And we negotiated with the city a change of zoning from a 3-story zoning that the plot had to a mixed height with 50% of free space and with buildings with different heights in the middle of the block. So if you look at it from a bird's eye, that's kind of like what we were working with, you know, like trying to keep to the scale of the neighborhood and then going up in the middle of the neighborhood. Here you can see again the idea of a double, well, this is a section through the city. That's what we kept. A double deck of parking to be able to keep all of these structures and also to keep some of the trees that you will see that were in the site. We wanted those trees to remain. So it was like, again, we built 2 decks of parking in one part and we leave the rest permeable with trees and with the original structures. And then we redensify them. It's important. Sometimes even going up to 6 stories, but in the middle of a block, you don't really see them. So there you can see the new density added behind the facade, using those beautiful windows for homes, recycling some of those old structures to make multiple use rooms for the people that live there or places for the children to play. This is a home, for example. It's like a loft. This is from above. We don't really see the city as this, only the birds, but I think it's nice to understand the city from above and how the building is kind of tucked into all of that different density happening, no? And then again, the same strategy of the previous project, the first one, keeping trees, keeping structures, adding density, and having a dialogue between brick. These are obviously less expensive units than the ones you saw in the first project. They are middle income to low income units, but they're amazing in the middle of the city, amazing units. The ground floor, the soft ground floor here in the middle of the block is some private patios, some buildings that don't touch, again, the ground. It's like a small maze that takes you discover different kinds of courtyards, different sizes, some with trees, existing trees, some with new planters. Sometimes the buildings don't, there are no units on the ground floor. So again, it's this idea of raising the floor so that the space can go under the buildings. Sharing the elevators and creating these bridges that the bridges obviously connect you to your homes, but they also connect you to people. People meet, they become a community, and these spaces kind of make you become part of that community. Again, a hotel very close to the one we saw previously in Cuauhtémoc, behind Reforma. This is this alley street behind Reforma, so it's a very thin street, not really nice street because it's like where all of the back of house happens for the tall buildings in Reforma. You've seen that when you've been in Manhattan, in New York, you know what I'm talking about, those side streets where it's not so nice to walk. So here you see the condition. That's Reforma. Those are the tall buildings here, and this is a small alley. So we decided to disregard for the rooms the facade. We decided to make an interior courtyard, and we decided that all of the rooms would live into the interior courtyard. So the facade became like a deep facade that we would place onto the building. It would have the elevators, the stairs, some amenity spaces, a garden, the pool, some things. It's maybe like 11 feet thick. And then behind that, there is this courtyard where all of the rooms live into that courtyard. And then that's the level of the street. We decided to go under the level of the street, almost 3 stories. So you can see here the relationship between our building and this is actually like a parking of the tall building that begins here and goes like, I don't know, 30 stories up. It blocks the south exposure of the sunlight. So there is a small entrance here. And once you go into the hotel, which is already extending the sidewalk, making a small jest because there is no sidewalk almost, then you have a lookout point here into this courtyard all the way up, and you can see the activity happening 2 levels below the street with a lobby restaurant. And then there's an additional level with a speakeasy bar underneath. And then this is the facade space that I was talking about, the deep facade with different programs happening on split levels with double heights. And then the pool and the roof terrace on the last floor, relating that last floor to all of the tall buildings that happen in Reforma. So this is kind of like inviting people into creating a sidewalk, a nicer experience, and the mystery of what you will discover. The facade is like an urban lamp. So at night and during the day, it allows south exposure sun to come into the courtyard, and at night it's a lamp on this kind of small alley street. We had fun designing a really, I don't know, nice promenade or, you know, like a narrative of going down into this -2 through this sculptural stair, inviting people to use the stair. So once you enter the hotel, you're almost welcome to enter the stair and go down. And then here you are below the city level. This floor was designed by an artist, Perla Krause. It's an art piece made of different kinds of stones from the volcanic area of Mexico, around Mexico City. You kind of feel the facade there and the light that comes in softly through the facade into the courtyard. And then there are several layers of screens that allow for privacy in between the rooms. Maybe for a housing project, it would be too much, no, to have people so close to you. But for a hotel, I think it's even fun. This is the retaining wall that we built because Mexico City used to be a lake. It's a lake bed, and this part has the ground level water is really high. So there's water behind this wall. So in order to build this, we need to do a wall that kind of contains soil, and then we take the soil out once we build the wall. So the wall is built first. And when we take the formwork out of the wall, we find all of these imperfections, which we really loved and adopted, and they became part of this kind of basement garden. This is the -2, which is the speakeasy bar. A section through the court. And the different layers that allow you to have privacy even while you're in this reduced space. You have the architectural curtain, and then you have like two different kinds of curtains, and the terraces and everything is filtering your view, and you kind of feel that light is kind of thick here. The lower you go, the first levels of the hotel, I like they have a quality of really kind of being, light becomes this thick material. They are deep rooms that have a living space next to the bed. And then as you gradually arrive at the roof, then Mexico City reveals itself through some openings that show you the skyline, and also the vegetation changes. It becomes tropical, like a tropical garden on the last floor. And you feel the presence of the big tall buildings of Reforma, and you know where you are. This second part talks about how public and cultural spaces become spaces for all, and how we can kind of make them even more open than we usually do. Usually some of these gardens within the public spaces are gated, at least in Mexico. So how do you make a museum without a gate, and how do you induce people to walk through the garden like a shortcut between the city? Those were questions that we were asking ourselves when we worked on this Soriano Contemporary Art Museum in Cuernavaca. So this building is sitting on a former site of two homes that were built as weekend homes. The garden is over an acre. Cuernavaca is a city that is an hour away from Mexico City. It's a weekend town, or it was. Today it isn't. Today is more than that, obviously. But in the 50s, and it has amazing weather. The climate there, they say it's the eternal spring. So those are the words, la eterna primavera, which means that the weather is really beautiful all year long. And the center of Cuernavaca is right here. And our museum is here, and there is a change of grade that gradually goes down into this. It used to be a river, and then it gradually goes up again. Our building sits here and has a relationship with the centro of the city, but it also has a relationship with a small center of a small neighborhood or barrio that has a church and a market and a public school. So in a way, people that live here can go through to the centro. The museum becomes kind of like a passage or a garden street, a park street of the city. So that's what I was explaining, the topography and the visual relationship between the center of the city and the possibility of our neighborhood center with the museum and the rest programs, and the original river, which is a rain drainage. Some historic photographs where you can see the Palacio de Cortés, which is a very important old structure from when the Spanish conquered Mexico. People walking from the neighborhood where we built our museum, the relationship to the city center. The Palacio de Cortés is here as well. And as an urban small center, it has a lot of activity behind our museum. So we wanted to connect to that energy that was already present there. This was our competition entry. It was a limited competition by invitation, and we presented the idea of a garden that would house the sculptures of Juan Soriano, which was going to be the museum of his archive. He is an important artist from Mexico, and the government had acquired his archive, and it was going to be showcased here amongst becoming also a contemporary art museum. So the idea was to make the garden the space that made really the project engage with the community of Cuernavaca, and to include a museum, because that was our commission, no? But for us, the garden was very important. People in Mexico used to go to Cuernavaca for their gardens. And gardens are, you need to have a big garden, you need to have a big house to have a garden. So public gardens are not so extensive in Cuernavaca. So this one had an opportunity of becoming that garden, one of those 3 gardens that the city has. Those were the original structures that were sitting on the site, and the original trees that were sitting on the site, which we decided to maintain and to work with the existing footprint almost of the houses to be able to keep the trees and to build within the area where there were no trees, where the houses used to sit. And the design strategy is more this idea of making a very, very, very soft open floor plan, as soft as it's 100% public space, because it's the plaza, and then this is a public space that has a cafeteria and the entrance to the museum, and then the garden is open to the public, and then there are artist residence workshops here, and then you walk out to the other side, no? So all of there's a public library within the museum, so everything is, in a way, it's public space. It's almost all green area, and there are several access points so people can walk through and use it as a shortcut. So the ground floor plan is a portico plan. It's columns that make the building kind of levitate, and the public realm goes through. There is an underground gallery here that at the level of the garden is a fountain. And then there's a change of scale with the small art studios that are connected to a smaller scale neighborhood center that I showed you. So in section, again, it's like the city has this space to go through. The museum has its back of house and some parking here. It has its exhibition space above. So that in that way, all of the ground floor becomes a public space that can be traversed within the building or through the garden, or a combination of both. And then there is a small cafe space on the roof of that part that has a lookout to the centro of Cuernavaca. Even from the garden, you will see there are some windows. Yeah, this is some photographs of the finished project with the fountains, the relationship to the city center, and how the trees and everything were kept. The other part of the small neighborhood barrio. That's the access plaza. There is no door to the museum here, and there is no window here, and there is no window anywhere, actually, because it's breathing. The floor plan, I was telling you about this amazing weather, so why put air conditioning inside? So the air blows through, flows through. You feel you're walking on a porch. It's like a porch. We fought to death not to put a door. You know, people are, at least in Mexico, people sometimes are afraid to go into a museum. They feel strange. So how do you make it easier? There's no door. And it's a public space. And the exhibition is something you can visit if you want, but it's not necessarily the objective of your visit to this garden. All of this is the public part of the museum, the public library. The stair, again, as the stair in the hotel invites you up, there are some windows that connect to the city of Cuernavaca. And then the gallery space has a possibility of becoming dark or It can be a black cube or it can have natural daylighting, and it can have anything in between. It can be subdivided into 3 galleries. It has some windows that allow you to see what time of the day is outside and to have a pause. This is the underground gallery underneath the trees, underneath the garden, underneath the fountain. It's a cube, 60 by 60 feet cube with 18 feet of height. Every year, the garden is better. It's amazing how it's used, how people enjoy. Yeah, it's like a public venue that makes the museum totally public and extroverted, even for picnics. Recently, we finished this project in Jalapa, Mexico. This is almost to the Gulf of Mexico, in a city in Veracruz. We were asked to make a public structure within this park. It's called the Parque Ferrocarrilero, connected to the railway that passes here, which is a right-of-way from a company in the US that used to have the trains in Mexico many, many years ago. That right-of-way still exists. And this park was kind of I mean, it was nice, but it was not really programmed other than the trees. We were asked to do some pavilions that would talk about, that could be used for multiple uses, but that could also talk about how buildings are sustainable, how they are open, how they can breathe, how they can collect rainwater, like those kind of things. So we kind of designed like open structures that could accommodate different programs, that could harvest rainwater. We made use of the existing trails that they had and created like a small area for children's games and these different pavilions that happen here for multiple use, as you can see, different activities, some bathrooms. The project is already inscribed there. Obviously, the trees don't show it. So the section is like an open section that there is a relationship on the ground floor that allows you to see through the buildings. And finally, this is our office space. It's within an old industrial neighborhood, right next to one of the most beautiful parts of the city, Santa María la Ribera. This neighborhood that I was saying, if you remember Reforma Avenue, to the south of Reforma Avenue are Roma, Condesa neighborhoods, which are famous today. There are many US people living there, actually. The nomads, the digital nomads that they call them. And then to the north is Cuauhtémoc, the 2 hotels I showed you. And then Santa María la Ribera, which is that housing project with the chocolate factory that I showed. And then Atlampa. So everything is like in the same part of the city that I've been talking about. This was our office before. We were in Condesa in this 1960s building until the pandemic hit us in the face, all of us. That was our office. This is Aisha, my partner, and me. We're both are teaching at Knoxville. That's a museum model, actually, in 2018. So it was a nice space. We had our vertical garden there. We had some a porch that made us not use the air conditioning. We would open and ventilate the space. But anyway, we left because we wanted to move out and have a different experience. So that's the Chapultepec Park. This is like the center of the city that I've been talking about. This is Reforma Avenue. And this is Santa María la Ribera. And this is the industrial part of Atlampa. So it's walking distance, actually. So you can see the divide between Santa María la Ribera and Atlampa. Here you realize it's a industrial neighborhood, and that's in 1955, this photograph. These are some historic photographs of Atlampa, the types of industrial buildings we would build that are so beautiful. We don't build them like that anymore. It's a shame. But some overpasses that kind of made the city go over Atlampa and not touch Atlampa. So it was like an area that was kind of disconnected from the city. The rail doesn't work anymore, so it's slowly becoming a park, not yet here in this neighborhood. That's an old gas station and some ruins. Here it says Atlampa for Atlampa. The neighbors don't want it to be gentrified, I guess. Street vendors that happen all over Mexico. Some old brick factories that are still there. So the ice factory, when I was looking for an office space to move out of the former one and into a new era for our office after the pandemic, I was looking for a garden. That was the objective. It was not easy to find a garden with an office in Mexico. So a friend of mine owned this building. He had it sitting there as a storage space, waiting for something to happen to that structure. So he told me, well, this is not a garden. It doesn't have a garden. It's not an office either, but maybe you should go see it. And maybe you'll like it. And if you do, maybe you can use it as your office and you can build a garden after. So that's the location of it. There is this was part of a huge former beer factory called Central. These are some photographs of that brewing company that was damaged in the 1985 earthquake. Nonoalco Tlatelolco, which is an amazing part of Mexico City, is Santa María la Ribera. ¿Dónde está Nonoalco? To the north, no? Yeah, here. It was a development built in the 1960s by Mario Pani. It's housing, equipment, cultural institutions. It was a housing project financed by the government and designed by architects in a different time of Mexico. So that's the site of the old brewing company. So all of this was the brewing company. This is the ice factory. Here you see photographs of, there was a house where today is a garden. That house, we converted that house into a garden. You'll see trucks would go underneath this structure and they would fill in with ice and then they would move. So the ice was made on this box that is above that portico. This is our office doing a site visit, 2020. This is the inside of that box that you will see soon. I was telling everyone what they thought if we should move here or not. That's the roof and the view to other industrial buildings and to Tlatelolco project. And then this is kind of like the process. We already got rid of the house here. It's part of the garden now. So this is the original structure of the factory. We added this extension to it. The garden is in the middle. The ground floor is kind of like an open space where we have our conferences, we have meetings with other friends. We have thrown parties. There are lectures. We had students We will house students next summer there in a summer program that we're wanting to establish with schools from outside of Mexico and within Mexico. It's a project that we're working on. That's part of how, well, these photographs show how we found the building originally and what became of that space. Today, that's the same ground floor. That's photographs with our office already working in the space. The garden is 2 years old. We moved in 2 years ago in May, so a little bit over that. The Arquine festival that happens in September in Mexico, that I think some of you will attend, had an opening 2 years ago in our factory. So it was a crazy event where I met many people that I had not seen in many years that suddenly appeared. It was incredible. It became the house of the party of the architecture festival. It's our kitchen as well. So we cook there. These are the original curtains that would close all the way down and trucks would come in and out. And the ice would be unloaded into the trucks through this. There were some perforations here. And this is part of the process. That's the extension that we're building. The extension, you don't see it anymore. There's the garden. And this is the fridge or the box where the ice was made. It had structures like that, 6 octagons, and a lot of furniture. And yeah, that was the state of it when we got there. We began cleaning, sandblasting all of the sealants and the insulation and everything that it had. We took it all out. We opened this window that is a homage to Lina Bobardi at the Seschi Pompeia in Sao Paulo. She talks about prehistoric windows, which I think is a beautiful idea. It has become the symbol of the factory. That is already our work team in the space. It's between South America and from outside it's like Africa, depends how you see it. And the story is a nice story because it was like an accident. They were demolishing and I was able to stop the demolition right there. And we were not expecting to have such a beautiful window actually. So the factory is also a self-sustainable ecosystem. We harvest our rainwater. We treat all of our black water and gray water. We have landscape and gardens that have become, it's a cool space, cool in terms of a colder space. It's a nice factory, so it should be cold. We have photovoltaic systems for energy. But I think that what's more remarkable is that it has become a showcase of these kind of simple strategies that we show our clients, we show students. So basically, whatever rain falls on this roof is harvested and potabilized within our facility. That's the water we use for washing our hands and for cooking. And then all of the water that is going through the restrooms is on a closed cycle. So we're not using any black water, any potable or clean water for that. We don't take water from the city and we don't give water back. Whatever excedents we have, we infiltrate back into the ground level water. And the trees in the garden is already sitting in a very humid clay that because the ground level water is already there anyway. Those are the filters for the rainwater. The first filter. And then this is also an homage to the wetlands in Mexico City. I told you Mexico City has this lake bed, swamps, wetlands. So the landscape of Xochimilco, which still remains from that era is kind of like a homage here, where we have the same types of trees and plants that are doing a double job. They are landscape, it's beautiful, but they are working to treat and clean our water. So we've converted the factory as a school. We've done charrettes, design studios. There is a friend of several of us, Marlon Blackwell, with his GSD studio this May. He was there. And now we're working on this project here, which is kind of like a lab. The owner wants to do something with that part of the site. So it's almost an acre. We're working with this idea of extending the garden that we made and creating like a puzzle of small gardens, 3-story buildings, ground floor soft with retail and workshops, 2 levels of housing above that. Economic housing, 700 square foot units, treating all of our water, harvesting all of our rainwater, making the edge to the city softer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Javier. We have a few minutes for questions? You're good with that?
Of course. Yes, that's what I came for.
Now to put you guys on the spot, are there any questions? I'm sure after that amazing lecture. Okay, I saw your hand. I'll give you and I'll come over to you, okay?
Thank you for your lecture. So each of your projects has such a good attention to detail. I was wondering what process you go through to maintain that kind of sensitivity in each of your projects.
Well, we try to work with the idea of place, as Shona was presenting her lecture series, making places. How do you make a place? We try to work with what is existing in a place. We try to uncover and to make visible certain layers that are not maybe so visible sometimes. There is the traditions of a place, there is a culture of a place, there is a landscape, there is so many things that we can bring into our projects. The way we build, the way we used to build. I mean, it's like trying to do a little bit of research initially, or a lot of it, to understand the site, to understand what our client wants, what we want, and how we connect it to the specific place where it will happen. So in that way, I think all of the projects are different because they are in a different place, even within the same city or the same neighborhood. But in the end, they are worked on from a same kind of design philosophy, no? Where we're trying to uncover those layers to continue the tradition. We're trying not to be very, very taken away by maybe unnecessary things. In Mexico, we have a lot of freedom to work, but budgets are tight. We cannot get away with everything we want, so we need to focus on what is the important, what is the purpose, what is the intention of a project, what is the strategy, and try to stick to those and take them to the end. And when you lose battles on the way, you try not to lose those, because those are what really excites you, what interests you, what you think is non-negotiable. And then I think all of the rest is negotiable. Things can be built cheaper, always, quicker, not always, but we can try. And I think that's what maybe makes us resilient and comprehensive of the difficulty of building, which is to build is very, very difficult. You need so many things to happen. So you try to focus on 3 or 4 important things, and the rest you flow.
Thank you.
I think we speak for everyone when I say, like, thank you for coming to Miami. That was a beautiful lecture. I feel like I need to go sit in silence for 30 minutes and like just take that in. That was amazing. So thank you. My question is, do you go and visit the sites? I know you said you had your practice for almost 30 years. That's a long time. Do you go and visit your buildings that you've built? And if you do, what are some things that have surprised you once you have visited?
I'm trying to figure out where you're seated. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comment first of all. Yes, I go back a lot. Last week, we had our students visiting. We made an intense plan for them, almost 8 days of intensity in Mexico City and Oaxaca. And we take them to see our projects, and we have to call some of our clients to see if they can give us access. And so I don't know. I've been surprised sometimes by the way they age, the way people are using them. I'm always very happy when people, a project I didn't show today. We went to visit last week. And some people that live in that project that I had never met from 2006, they were waiting for me when I arrived. It's a housing project, and they were really waiting. I was impressed because what they wanted was to ask me what I thought of their building, what I thought today of a building that I designed or we designed in the office almost 20 years ago, 18, no? So they wanted to see my reaction, and I told them, I think you're worried about things that are not important, because buildings age, and I think aging is part of life, So, and today I see things differently. I'm very interested in making our projects become integral to the resources as much as we can, to recycle and to integrate water systems and to celebrate water. And those, I'm like the water guy in the office today. I'm always trying to find out what we can do, because we are living this tension in our city. And I think, and I see it rain, like today it rained here, and I love rain. And today I appreciate rain so much, but some years ago I didn't so much, because then there would be leaks in some projects, and we would have calls and, hey, the roof is leaking here and there or whatever. But today I think that we need to make water move through our buildings and retain humidity and to create soil. And so all of that has changed in me, and sometimes some projects from earlier years, I think we could have done more for that. But that's the learning curve, no? You get to a point and you are different. But I don't know, I like to see that buildings look well over time. If I can explain that, meaning they don't look aged so much. Maybe some things do, but and then I think of the 1950s and 1960s, those early factories that I showed you in Atlanta that are maybe 100 years old. And do they look aged? They don't, right? They look like they want to have a renovation. They want to be used in a different way, but would you demolish them? I wouldn't. And that gives me a little bit of hope, that architecture doesn't rely on superficial things. And technology is important, but I think culture is more important. You know what I mean? I mean, culture is the basis of us as a group, as a human group. It's why we have evolved. And technology is a tool, but it's not the driver, I think. And keeping patrimony or protected buildings or even protected buildings structures, keeping the genius loci, as Norbert Schulz used to say, the genius of a place alive throughout generations, I think is amazing. It amazes me, no? So that's what I try to work with, and that's what I'm looking for when I go back to the projects, no? And I'm very happy when that happens, you know, like someone says, I'm very happy here. Wow, that's such a compliment.
Oh, okay, one more. Okay, I'll come back to you. Did you shut yours off over there?
Thank you so much for being here. At one point you mentioned building a garden, and I wonder what the difference is between building a garden and growing a garden. And then what kinds of place-based research do you do to design a garden? Thank you.
It's a nice question. It's I think in Mexico we use some words for many purposes, in Spanish maybe. So construir or build is, we don't only use it for buildings. We use it for creating something, no? So I was kind of meaning more that we like to work with landscape architects very much. And for example, in the factory, the garden in the factory was thought of in terms of an academic kind of garden that could help us explain to visitors the wetland landscape and why it is so important, why wetlands are so important, no? And also our mid-mountain forest with the oaks and the pine trees that we have surrounding Mexico City at the altitude of Mexico City at almost 7,000 feet above sea level. What plants grow there and how would that place be if there was no Mexico City, you know, like what would that look like? And so we were trying to do this garden that was more related to the natural, to the history of the landscape in the place. I don't know if that's what you were asking me, kind of. Is that it, or? So when we work with landscape architects, that's kind of like the question. You know, in many of our gardens, we've been able to keep what was already there. Like in the first project I showed you, people decided to grow, I don't know, 30 species different of trees because maybe someone gave them a tree and suddenly 60 years later, it's huge, no? So I love working with that, with what is there, you know, like it adds so much. So it's like this succession, I think. Something I've learned of gardens is that there is a succession, no? You begin by growing small plants that are protected by bigger plants, and eventually these small plants take over and become the tallest ones. And I think that's beautiful. I think we should all research more, no, about gardens and about, it would make us, I think, understand so much more where we live and the things that don't need any maintenance or any irrigation, you know, like grass, no? The monoculture of grass. We're fighting against that all the time. Our clients want grass, we don't want grass. So what do we do instead of grass? Something that doesn't require water and that looks beautiful as well. It's not an English garden, but we're not in England. It doesn't rain like it rains in England. So those are our thoughts.
I was wondering, what do you think is responsible for the artisanal movement in architecture in Mexico? I guess maybe it's existed for thousands of years, obviously has a rich ancient history, but more recently, you still see architects who are devoted to materiality or more like artisanal methods of construction. So I guess my question is, how have you been able to resist some of the more standardized construction practices and materials that are probably more common here in the United States than maybe they are in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex question to answer because we still have those traits and we are able to integrate them into our design. So we have become collaborators with, for example, with the people that do the steel work. Pablo Reyes, he's one of our go-to teams, or the best one we have. We figure out with him how to build something in steel, and he's a real master of that, no? And I would say that when we work with artisans, like I didn't show you today, but we took a commission in Madrid, in Spain, and it was about a Mexican restaurant. And what is Mexico in Madrid? How do we make that translation? And what part of Mexico and what time? How do you connect? And what we thought was that we could work with artisans to make a lot of things, with some designers to make chairs, with some artisans to make the art, with others to make the fabrics or the ceramics, the clay, no? So, but yes, in Madrid, clay, you cannot put your lips to clay directly. In Oaxaca, you can. So how do you jump that obstacle, and you kind of have to create a new form of doing, no, with them. They have done it for centuries like this, and now it needs to be modified. And I think we're very lucky because we can work with them. You know, like the comal. The comal is maybe a good example. The comal is where we make the tortillas in rural Mexico, and it's usually this clay big plate with fire underneath. We do the tortillas there. So we sent to Madrid a comal, a more urban comal made of volcanic stone. And we had a shop do that for us and we sent it over. So we try to, I don't know if it's resist, or we try to collaborate with people that can do that with us, to make them part of the project, to keep them alive, not for any nostalgic reason, but because what we have is incredible, and we should continue those traditions if we can, no? Those traditions die when suddenly the porcelain arrives from China, and then, but you know what I think is, we spend on so much things that have no value as a world, no? And in the things that have value or cultural value, we spend less, no? So imagine you're buying a set of plates and cups and bowls, and you know that if it gets broken, you throw it into the earth and it becomes part of the soil. And maybe you have artisans that you subscribe and they send you, every year they send you, even if you didn't break it, and then you give it to someone else. And you make it important. It's a beautiful gift. So I think those things, we have to struggle to keep them alive. But I think today our clients are more interested in that, because everything is ubiquitous or generic, no, in general in the world. And what makes a difference? I think those things make a difference. The place makes a difference. So yeah, there are some things that I'm sure you can find here in Miami, in the culture of Miami, that maybe are still alive, maybe. Where are they? What are they? You know, and how does that become part of your discourse?
Thank you. I think we'll end on that and give you the evening. Can you guys help me again? Thanks, Javier, for joining us.
Yes.